We're going to be going over several things to help set us up for this next ethnography unit. You've been doing quite a bit of work looking at the language of scientific discourse through your academic article critique and through your popular science writing article critique, and then with the book review also, analyzing and ethnography. So these next 3 weeks, you're going to be working on your own ethnography. So you finally get to do some scientific writing of your own. We spent the first 8 weeks or 7 weeks of the class pretty much analyzing scientific writing, and so this is an important week because now we're taking a turn so that you can start to put together some of your own scientific writing. So the first one that we're going to be working on is an ethnography assignment, and this is because the past couple of weeks we've been looking at the Craig Mishler book, Black Ducks and Salmon Bellies, and that's an ethnography. So it just makes sense that this first real scientific piece that you're putting together is an ethnography too. So I have up here on the screen the instructions for the ethnography that you're going to be working on. I'm not going to go over this in too much detail because you can read it for yourself, but there are a few highlights I want to get to. So the first thing is basically the overall goal of your ethnography. You're going to investigate, analyze, consider the ways in which idiosyncratic, communicative, research practices of cultures and subcultures affect and are affected by audiences of peers and non-members. Wow, that sounds pretty thick. So after the definition, this kind of rewords it a little bit. You're going to adopt the stance of a participant observer in any subculture that you are interested in researching. And this can be, and by subculture, that is an anthropological term meaning any group of people. You get to observe any group of people, any group at all that you want to. And your aim is to identify, describe, and analyze the different communication practices within that group. Reading, writing, speaking, and visual communication practices. So you don't have to research necessarily, it might come up, but you don't have to go into so much historical detail or economical detail as Craig Mishler. Here we're focused on language because this is a language class. You're focusing on the language practices of this group. Your goal then is to become an expert of sorts on the language of that culture or subculture. So, and yes, I am using the word culture or the words culture, subculture, group very loosely because I want you to find a group that's interesting to you, I suppose. I've had several students, for example, they would just go and visit a church or another religious organization that they've never been to before, but they've always been kind of interested in, and so they'll go at one point for this unit and write this ethnography on that group. I've had students just go to their local Starbucks and sit at a Starbucks for about 6 or 7 hours and just record the different practices that kind of go on at a Starbucks. That one might be a little bit more random, but some very interesting conclusions come from that. I've had students go to a playground when the weather is nice and during the day and see what happens there, or a mall or a particular store. So if for example if you work in retail, that might be an interesting group to analyze for yourself. You can go to, if you're a member of any kind of civic organization or volunteer organization, that would be worth hopefully maybe if you have a meeting really soon, or that if you've recently had one and you can recall a lot of these details, do some writing about that. I've had some students write about not their family but like their friends' families, for example, or maybe their in-laws. Again, you have to be an observer, so you have to be able to distance yourself a little bit from what it is that you're observing. But you can certainly participate. Any kind of sports event, you can definitely. There's a specific group that goes to those kinds of events, or to a bowling alley. So anyway, the point is that you can interpret group, as broadly as you want to, or not as broadly, but as creatively as you want to. So if you're taking another class like on the UAA campus or on the Kodiak campus, you could write this ethnography about that class if you take other classes on campus. This assignment certainly applies. You don't have to go out of your way to find a group. Find a group that you're kind of connected with already, but that you can still feel objective, or you can get to that sense of objectivity. Think of this as even though this isn't ethnography, you can still think of this as a fun or creative assignment, especially depending on the group that you choose to write about. I have a list of different techniques, and I'll be going over some different research things in a minute, but I've made a list right there for you to be thinking about. Other techniques, you might want to do a little bit of library research, depending on which group that you're writing about. You do have to interview at least one member of the group that you're researching. Just one, at least one member, and it can be the leader of the group, it can be a participant of the group, just somebody in the group. We'll talk about interviewing in a minute. Participation, attendance, okay, and then yes, this is the big one, personal observation. You're going to be using that one probably the most. So there's a framework that I want you to be thinking about. I'm not going to leave you high and dry. I have a lot of just kind of guiding questions for you to be thinking about as you're putting together this ethnography. Some of these you will use, some of these you will not use. Your ethnography only needs to be, I think it's a minimum of 750 words. So you obviously, to 1250 words. So obviously you don't have a lot of room to talk about all of these questions, plus that would take a really long time. So you need to use at least 3 of the following categories in developing your ethnography. So whatever group you choose to investigate, you'll be emphasizing these particular elements, more or less. There's one category about facilities. Where does this group meet, and what is the purpose of that space, and what does the space look like, how accessible is that space, things like that. Another category is their practices. What do they do? What kinds of traditions or rituals or activities does this group partake in? And some guiding questions there. The third category is communication. How do they communicate with each other? Generally, there are more specific questions about reading, writing, oral communication, and visual communication or symbolic representation. And then public perception of the field. If it's relevant, how do others outside of the field view the field or the group? How do they view that group? I guess I should change that word. How do they view that group? You need to include at least 3 of those sections. Something about facilities, the practices, communication, reading, writing, oral, visual, or public perception. You can include as many as you want, but you have to write about at least 3 of those, and use these questions in each category to help guide your research. So as you're making observations and conducting interviews, use these as jumping off points. Use these questions as jumping off. So yeah, you do need to interview at least one person in the group, and then we'll talk about APA format for citing all these different things. So we have 3 weeks. It's due November 5th. So this week you're just going to do a little bit of brainstorming, a little bit of invention. Next week you'll write a rough draft, and then the week after that we'll work on revising that for your final draft. So not a lot of reading for over the next couple of weeks, because it's going to be focused more on your research and organization and your writing for this ethnography.